Hello everyone and welcome back to Application Development with ASP.NET episode 13. In this video, Nelson continues with setting up our AutoMapper.
Yes.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
We shall.
Now go.
So, yeah, basically, the issue is now we need to come up with a strategy for mapping the entities that are going to be in these two class libraries. And I know we've talked about these two class libraries, but we haven't implemented anything yet. What's going to go here are, different folders. Like, for example, we're going to have like a user folder and a feature folder and a client folder and stuff. And inside those folders are going to go the individual entities that are contained within the aggregate. And those entities need to be mapped somehow. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and, that is no focus. Hold on. Okay, there we go. I'm going to go ahead and add a arbitrary users folder with a user class as an example of something that we might, or we are going to be wanting to map. And then we'll see about getting this mapped in a way that doesn't, destroy the integrity of the project. Because if you remember, we might have to at some point, but we want to avoid having to reference and hibernate directly from the domain or the query model. And the reason is that's sort of a philosophy. Yeah. It's sort of a philosophy.
Why do I picture a gigantic mosquito just flew straight into his mouth?
That's sort of a philosophy of these two projects, because these two projects should be completely void of all infrastructure. And like I said, to that end, we need to get and hibernate out of these guys and put them in services. So our goal is, our short-term goal at least, is to auto-map user against some sort of connection that we're going to be setting up in the web app and console app that we kind of have been neglecting up here. To start that, we need to head over to our iUnit of Work provider factory, and hold on, that's not sorting right. iUnity of Work.
Nice.
Nice.
Or entity unity of work. There we go. Okay. So we need to get into our entity unit of work provider factory, and we need to set up our configuration pretty much right here. Now, there's different ways that we can do this. We could actually, for the simplest thing, we could just go ahead and automap right here. It's not going to be the end of the world. The thing that I'm trying to get at, which I think I just failed by making irrelevant, is that we need some sort of a hook system in our framework to be able to inject these class code in places that only have a reference to the base. But unfortunately, it looks like we can get by without it. So we're not going to cover that right now. Eventually we will. But I don't want to do something just for the sake of doing it without any context.
What, you? No?
Yeah,
just kidding.
Okay, so we're going to create a folder, and the folder is going to be called mappings. And then we'll create our AutoMapper, and our AutoMapper class is just going to be a wrapper over a configuration object. So it's going to take in a configuration object, it's going to do its thing. This is just a way to kind of compartmentalize the code. We could take this code and duplicate it twice for the two assemblies that we need to map inside of this service, but instead we're going to break it out into a class because we're good like that. So this class is going to take two assemblies. It's going to take the assembly that we need to map. So the assembly to map, it's going to take another assembly. This is going to be the override assembly. And we'll see that, I think we did talk about Fluent and Hibernate overrides?
I think so.
Well, the reason I want to separate the assembly to map and the override assembly is that we need to map this assembly. But like I said, we want to keep and Hibernate out of this class library. And in order to create mapping overrides, we need to reference and Hibernate. So I'm going to break them apart to where the overrides are going to exist in this assembly, and the entities are going to exist in this assembly, if that makes sense.
Okay.
And then we're going to take in an IEnumerable of strings, which are the namespaces of the entities that we want to map. So let's go ahead and create a bunch of immutable private fields.
Okay, we're having the lovely Skype breakup
That was
again.
immutable private fields,
Yes.
as spoken by Darth Vader.
Am I back?
No, not all the way yet.
Must be the weather. Solar flares. I'll bet it's solar flares.
About 2012.
Mm-hmm.
We're almost there. It's warm
Isn't the
enough.
sun supposed to eat us? I thought the sun was getting like...
The sun is
20
going to eat us.
No, I read some article on Wikipedia about unexplained sun phenomenon, and one of them was us getting bigger or something. I don't know.
That's the most awesome thing I've ever. I'm glad
Isn't
we've
the
got
sun
that on.
supposed to eat us? That's a soundbite. All right, you're back now, though, so
Yes.
let's continue.
Okay, so we need the public void configure method that's going to take in a mapping configuration object, which is a part of Fluent and Hibernate. And then this is when things get ugly. Remember?
Okay.
Well, yeah, I guess I just have to do it. I don't personally like this code at all. But we need to do mapping configuration.automappings.add, and then we need to do automap.assembly assembly, and then pass in our assembly to map. And then we need to pass in a new instance of our conventions class, which we haven't created yet. I'm just going to leave that blank right there. And he's going to require our namespaces. And at this point, this is where the nasty code comes in, where we have to add to the conventions. Okay, so this is where we'll talk about the convention overrides, nasty convention overrides.
Nice.
And then we have to say use override from assembly, and then pass in our override assembly.
I'm just floored that Nelson's using comments.
It's true.
Anyway. Well, no, this is appropriate because this is a comment that says code needs to go here that we haven't written yet.
Right. Yeah.
So that's fine. But see, I think I've already ranted about this in the other thing. The whole Fluent fad, I guess you could say. Well, I call it a fad. It's very appropriate in certain cases, especially AutoMapper. AutoMapper makes very good use of a Fluent interface. But as we'll see once we expand on this comment, Fluent in Hibernate does not, and it just serves to be confusing. So now we need to make a constructor that takes in an IEnumerable of assemblies. So yeah, these guys are going to, or this class is going to inherit from the default auto mapping conventions. Default auto mapping configuration, sorry. And we're going to override some methods on it. So to put this back into perspective, these are just, this class that we're passing in is just going to be responsible for telling Fluent and Hibernate what to map and what to ignore. So the most important override, so this is, by the way, Alt, or TeamViewer, Alt insert O, start typing in the override name is component space inner. So we just created an override for the isComponent method. Mm-hmm. And the isComponent method is going to actually, that was a terrible choice to start out with. We're going to leave that blank for right now. And we're going to do the shouldMap, which is the most important method. And then AutoMapper asks us, should we map for every type that it finds in the assembly that we passed in right here, which was passed in again from whoever instantiates this AutoMapper class. So the shouldMap is just going to say return namespaces, or assemblies. It should be namespaces. Why do I call it assemblies? Okay, return namespaces dot contains type dot namespace, and of course contains is a link method, so let's go ahead and get that over here. And this is saying, yeah, go away. Hint. But there's no accelerator key for that. Okay, then isComponent is going to be just defined in terms of the should map. And so basically, should map is should the AutoMapper map this class to the database. isComponent is going to say, should a type that we found as a property of a class that we're mapping, I know that sounded kind of confusing, should that class be considered a component or should it be considered a relationship to another entity? For example, if in my user I had a value type called name, AutoMapper has no way, and we haven't implemented this type yet, but pretend that we did. And AutoMapper has no way to know if this name is a reference to another entity or a value object that should be treated like a component mapping, like we saw in the original and Hibernate XML mappings.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where the isComponent method comes in. It's going to say this type is or is not a component, or is or...
Hang on one sec, Nelson. Your volume just dropped down significantly.
Hello?
All right, I think you're back.
I think computers just hate me today. So basically, the way we do this is pretty straightforward. If we shouldn't map it, and the type's assembly name starts with honeycomb, and that's because in addition to things like name, that is an appropriate use of the convention isComponent, like public virtual void or public virtual name like you just saw. It'll also call this isComponent on other types that shouldn't be components, like a datetime, for example, which is not a component. It's not a relationship. It's an actual type that it should be using as a property. Unfortunately, and Hibernate in all of its awesomeness asks us if we should treat the datetime object, for example, as a component, which we don't want to. So that's why we have right here, we say, make sure that we are not going to map this type, so therefore it is not an entity that should be referenced. And the assembly that this type comes from starts with honeycomb, which you see conveniently all of our assemblies do, except for web app, but we don't define any entities in web app, so it's not a problem. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so at this point we need to fill in this nasty code. And
just get through it.
We need to create new iConventions. And it's an array of conventions. And I'm going to be spending a lot of time formatting this code because it's very difficult to make it look good at all. I don't know whose idea this was. Class.always. And then we're going to be breaking this this out into another method, just so that things don't get too nasty. So this convention says that every single class should be given the table of the getTableName method, which we're going to implement right here. And this is important because we're going to be able to need to be able to override the name of a table or of an entity's table. And we're going to go ahead and cheat for now. We're just going to say return string.join underscore on entity type, or sorry, class instance dot entity type dot full name split on periods, and skip the first one. Okay, I'm bringing in link right now, by the way. Now, of course it failed. I don't know why. Look at this. Failed to import method. Sometimes Resharper refuses to import stuff. So we're just going to have the using link, and we're going to skip the first guy. Okay, and then we're going to tell this guy to go away, because yes, I know he can be null. Obviously, he can be null. Anything can be null. Why don't you just... Anyway. So basically what this says...
Do?
Oh, I told it to go away. I went to inspection options, and I switched it from a warning to a hint.
Okay.
I do this on the really annoying Resharper ones, like the ones that say this object can possibly be null, and it'll do that if it can't determine if you have done a null check previously for it. But see, here's the thing. Like, what can I do here? I can say if class instance is null, throw null argument exception, or I can just leave it like this is, and if class instance is ever null, it's going to throw a null reference exception anyway. So either way, it's going to throw an exception. There's no reason to add a if statement for a method that's not externally visible, because nobody else is going to have to be using this method because it's private. So that's why that's the reasoning I have for turning that particular thing into a hint, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So basically what this says is every entity that we're going to map, we want to give it a table name. And that table name is going to be the full name of the class with underscores instead of periods. So for example, the full name of this class is honeycomb.services.mappings.automapper. If we were mapping this as an entity, we would want the corresponding table name to be services_mappings_automapper. And that's what this does right here.
Okay.
And then we skip the first period because honeycomb is implied probably by the database name, which will be called honeycomb. So there's no reason to have a honeycomb underscore on every class or every table.
Mm-hmm.
So the next convention we need to add is the ID. And like I think we said this before, we're going to be using the GUID ID sometimes, or I don't know. For aggregate roots specifically, not for entities under those aggregate roots or under those aggregates. So we basically want to say when we find an ID property that is a GUID, we want to tell it to be generated by the GUID generator, which corresponds to... Do you remember...
Mm-hmm.
this?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the XML.
Yep. For GUID types, we want this to be GUID, or GUID. For integer types, we want it to be identity. So we're going to add two overrides. That's the first one's going to say convention builder.id when... This is where the syntax gets so nasty. It's like... Honestly, like, I don't know why I know you're going to hate me for saying this, but I would honestly prefer some sort of XML configuration for this than in code. This is not an appropriate use of C#. You should definitely use something more declarative like XML, or preferably JSON or YAML, but not C#. Because then it's not even, it doesn't look good. You can't discover it. It took me forever to write this code the first time. So, yeah, I'm sorry.
Did you make him do it in C#, Jason? Like this part of it?
Well, I wanted... Did you what, Nelson?
This part has to be. When you're doing the overrides, they have to be in C#. There's no way to define this bit.
Then how can it be an improper use if this is the way it has to be?
No, it doesn't have to be. If Fluent and Hibernate, the authors of Fluent and Hibernate had any sanity.
I see.
It's like, who here, out of everybody who's watching the video, would have decided to write this code trying to express what I just said? I mean, that's what I mean by fads. Like, I know me talking about fads might sound ironic.
Strangely ironic, yeah.
But when it gets to the point where you're doing, like, I want to build a Fluent interface, and then you get to the point where this is not Fluent at all, Okay, so then when we hit a GUID, we're generated by GUID. If we hit an int, we're generated by identity. So yeah. The other last override that we need to implement at some point is the has many. And remember, when we have an iList of an entity, so for example, if a user had an association to, I don't know, projects, and these are the projects he's assigned to, or these are the owned projects or something, I don't know. In this case, this could mean either one of two mappings. If project were another aggregate root, we would want the cascade to be none. We wouldn't want to cascade any operations. If we were to save a user, we wouldn't want his owned projects to be saved because that would be violating the very definition of an aggregate root. However, if this were a user and his own projects were contained within his own aggregate, where we instantiate a user to get to his own projects, to modify them, and then we save that user and we expect all of the own projects to be saved. At that point, we need a cascade of all delete orphan. And that's the attribute cascade with, well, all delete orphan, if you guys remember that guy.
Mm-hmm.
So because this isn't something we can identify in code. I mean, I guess we could say if it's in the same namespace, then it has all delete orphan, otherwise don't. But at that point, I think I would rather have it more explicit. So what we're going to do is we're going to stay with the defaults if nothing else is applied to this property. We're going to stay with none, which is the default of the cascade. However, if they have an owns attribute, we want the cascade to be all delete orphan. So let's go ahead and do that. See, and now this also brings up an interesting point because we need to bring the owns attribute somewhere into the that's accessible from the project or from the domain project, and that kind of does start to leak where we have to define it in the base. So I'm not particularly crazy about this particular method, but I think it's better than the alternative, which is to not have this functionality. So I don't know what to call this folder. I'm just going to leave it outside of the folder for now and just call it the owns attribute. And all he is going to have is he's going to attribute, and he's going to have an attribute usage of attribute targets property, and that's all he's going to have on him. So now properties here can say owns and bring in our honeycomb.base if they wanted to. So now we have to write the conventions for it. And again, we have to come back to the ugly syntax of this convention builder dot has many. So that's the association that we're overriding. When it has many, c.expect. When it has many, has a i.member. Member is going to be the member info of the collection. So it's going to be the property that the owned projects property, for example, will be the member. And then we need to say get custom attributes type of owns attribute, no inherit, and then any. And then we say when this condition is met, we need to do c.cascade all delete orphan. And then we'll just make this static to get Resharper to shut up. So yeah.
Cool.
Awesome.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Alrighty, so at this point we need to use our AutoMapper to automap both of our assemblies inside of our entity unit work provider factory. So it's going to be config dot something mappings, and then pass in an action. And there's our mapping configuration object that we can now use with our AutoMapper. So new AutoMapper, and then we can do yeah, at this point it brings up another challenge. We need to be able to reference the assembly of the domain, and I kind of wanted to keep that sort of I don't know. There's a few ways to do it. If you, I don't think I've ever asked you this, but if you needed to reference another assembly from this assembly and get the assembly object, what would you do, Jason?
Tonight's not a good time to ask.
I mean, we can do load. Yeah, but then if it becomes signed, we need to mess around with that. I'm just going to, for now, I'm going to say I am the domain assembly. This is the only type-safe way that I've found in the past to ever be able to reference assemblies between other assemblies. It's kind of gnarly, I know. And then so our override assembly is just going to be type of entity unit of work provider factory dot assembly, and our namespaces is going to be well, broken. Is going to be the assemblies that we need to, or the namespaces that we need to map. And then at the end of this huge thing, we're going to do configure and pass in M. And then Resharper is going to screw up our indentation, make everything squiggly, and yeah. So we're going to fill in this these namespaces with namespaces that we. So for example, user or honeycomb.domain.users, for example. And then as we add additional aggregates, we'll add those namespaces there. And then we also got to map the query model. So we'll go ahead and do that as well. And then at this point, we would then fill this in with pretty much the exact same thing, except for it just be query model.users. Okay, so there's our mapping code. I mean, there's really nothing else we need to do here besides actually configure and Hibernate and, well, get some stuff to work.
So that's probably a good place to wrap this video up then. And we can do the other one in the next video, keeping these a little bit shorter. And I guess we could go ahead and say, a second ago, Nelson, my apologies when you shot off a question. Zach and I were both over here trying not to...
well, pass out, really.
To die from lack of oxygen.
Oh. Sorry.
No. It wasn't you. It was, but then when you asked me a question, it really threw me off because it was my chair. I had managed to shift my weight and turn it just right, and I don't even think I can reproduce that.
No, I'm sure somebody caught it on the video and probably wondered what in the world that was.
Yeah.
Anyway, much hilarity ensued over here. We were trying to recover as best we could when you asked that question.
Yeah, the bottom line, it was the chair. This chair needs to be...
It needs some WD-40 or something.
Really, really bad. But,
Okay.
so anyways.
Yeah, I didn't mean to. I mean, I should probably put more thought into that particular question myself. It's just I've never really established a better way to do it other than create these dummy interfaces.
Yeah. But anyway.
Yes, yes. So anyways, we'll go ahead and wrap this video up, and we will continue with the next part in the next video. Thanks a lot, everyone.